Hello and welcome to Live Now, where we are building technology together. My name is Ben Friedman, and today we are continuing our series on how technology companies are managing with the COVID-19 crisis. And there's no one who has their finger on the pulse of enterprise IT quite like my guest today, Greg Ferro from Packet Pushers. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we get started with questions, I just want to know, are you okay? Your family's doing okay? And how are things over there across the pond in the UK?
Well, they are what they are. The world is a strange place at the moment. We're all safe. My family's all safe. I had the fortune to be away doing international travel just before this all kicked off. And when I flew back from Indonesia in late February, I went into isolation. So this is now my 54th day of being in isolation at home.
So had the lockdown happened already while you were still in Indonesia?
No, it became clear to me as I was researching and watching what was happening, because I didn't want to be trapped in Indonesia, and I could see that the situation was that eventually the flights would be suspended and that travel would get more difficult. And it was obvious when you look into the future that this is where. So as soon as we came back, we didn't want to take any more risks. So we just basically went into an isolation. And it was about 10 days later that they announced a full official lockdown here in the UK. And, you know, nobody's allowed out. We're allowed to go for walking for a bit every day, and only essential, trips to the supermarket or the medical. That's pretty much all we do. And I think the whole excitement of my life is down to sitting on my front porch with a cup of coffee in the morning when the sun's out. That's my...
Yeah, it's a fabulous thing here to be able to do that. And, the upshot of it is I'm spending more time at home, less travel, and which makes my wife and family happy. So that's a good thing. Tell me a little bit about your business. How has the current situation affected your business and your clients?
It's strange. So Packet Pushers is a podcasting business, or as we call it, a virtual events business. And what we're doing is effectively running virtual events that reach tens of thousands of people every time we publish an audio show. And people are opted in and they're listening to that. And of course, the change here for us is in two dimensions, or three dimensions really. In one dimension, people aren't going in their cars to work, or flying, or on buses and trains and so forth. And so our numbers have dropped a bit. We're losing 5 to 10% of our audience as people spend less time in the car and they're not consuming podcasts. But at the same time, from our client side, they're losing the physical conference business. So they've been out, going around the world, presenting at conferences, finding clients and customers by being at these events, by traveling, and those are all suspended. So we remain one of the largest outlets for virtual events today because of our established business, our subscription model where the audience subscribes to listen to the podcast. And so for every win, there's a loss. Where our audiences are a little bit lower, but we're much more in demand because we're still operating. And we're also an established brand. We're not starting from nothing. We're not starting from zero. People know us. People trust us. So for us, it's a change in the sense that there's some wins and there's some losses. Comes out about even for us overall.
Indeed. You are very much used to working remotely and used to working from home, but there's now a whole new segment of the IT enterprise sort of workforce that is now working for home. How do you think they're adjusting to that, and what do you think that means for the future of IT enterprise and networking? I know that there's a lot of networking folks that are probably very stressed right now trying to make sure they have the capacity and the bandwidth to be able to handle all of these new remote workers. What are you hearing from your clients?
So a lot of our people in our audience, we talk to them a lot and hear from them a lot. They're talking about how do they build remote access gateways and how do they build the remote access technologies and scale them. I was chatting to someone the other day, and he built a 10,000 user system in 3 weeks. So they went from 200 user remote access system to 10,000 users in just 2 or 3 weeks. And the stories are just like legendary. It's just how they managed to scale that up. And that is the story across the board. The challenge for people now to sustain or maintain the existing remote access infrastructures, make them substantially larger, and to maintain the security. Because remember, as all of these people work remotely, work away from home, they're much more open to spam and scammers and malware infections and virus infections. And that's becoming a main threat. So it's not as much of the problem is just keep the company working, get people working remotely where you can. Now it's turning into how do we sustain this? What is the security? How do we keep it secure? How do we keep these updated? That type of thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I know that. Sorry, go on.
Three. So what we were also looking at is the capability here is that there's two sides to the. We focus on IT people as people, not just as, consumables in the human resources infrastructure. And I think there's two things. One is there's a work-life change coming here. Like a lot of people are wanting to go back to work or looking forward to going back to work, but they're not going to be able to. Even when the lockdown ends, you're not going to be in the office in close proximity with all your co-workers. There's going to be a long, staggered return to work. And so IT teams are now having to make unusual plans where they're going to have some people back in the office, but the minimum number in the early days. And over time, people will return to work, if indeed they ever return to the office. And one of the flip sides of this is I noticed recently that the CEO of Goldman Sachs was popping up and saying, this remote working thing's really working out for us because we're thinking how much money we could save if we didn't have to build office space for all these people. So there is a real chance that companies are realizing just how much money could be saved in terms of raw office space, computing, power, lighting, air conditioning, all those types of expenses, which are substantial if they move to a remote working capability. So I think there's an interesting interplay there. And I think personally, a lot of people are going to have very interesting lives. Imagine, when you work from home or if you work from a home office or a home space, you need to have that space. And you need to work out how to live with your partner. And if you've got children or dependents at home, you've got to keep them all organized and structured. So there's a whole personal aspect to this. How do you live at home without the stimulation of the people? How do you relearn your work life? It's going to be a fascinating time ahead.
You mentioned security when it comes to remote working, and definitely that is a big issue. Something that has had a sort of a claim on security in the past, but I don't think has really caught on well is VDI. I'm just wondering if, in your opinion, could this be the year that sort of VDI really takes off and becomes a new way of doing business for remote workers, where they just need some sort of a dumb terminal at home, some sort of a Chromebook or what have you, and all of their infrastructure is kept on premises and they can log in from wherever. Could this be the year that takes off?
I don't think so. I think you'll see some customers turn to that because that offers a security posture and keeps the data inside of the perimeter and that type of thing. But it also requires a dramatic retraining of the way people work, the way that thin clients work as the performance isn't a native experience. A lot of people want to work offline, so they don't want to be working just from home. They want to be able to, move from place to place. And thin client doesn't allow you to work on a Word document while you're on a plane, for example, where, out of contact. You need to be in solid networking contact. And networks are still struggling in some parts of the world. So we have this problem with VDI. I think some companies will turn to it and they may use it for some things. So for certain lower level jobs where people have fixed tasks, defined activities, they may use that to keep control and not have that distributed security problem we talked about. But I think much more likely we'll see a beefing up of the desktop strategy or the laptop strategy and watching people upgrade that distributed working model so that they'll improve their collaboration tools and so forth to spread the work across many locations.
Interesting. So, okay, maybe not VDI, but in your opinion then, which technologies are going to see a real boost then from this new way of working, and which other technologies do you think might get left behind?
I'm not so sure we can identify technologies at this stage because it's much more about a trend. So in networking, which is my core expertise, we talk about private bandwidth, we talk about MPLS services and so forth. I think we're going to see a death of those. So if you're a networking engineer buying dedicated bandwidth from a telco, you're probably going to see the demise of that much quicker than we saw before, and the emergence of software-defined WAN technologies to take over that for space. And I think SD-WAN technology will rapidly start to embrace remote access and vice versa. So does the branch where people came in to print out pieces of paper and stamp stuff stay alive? I think the branch continues on as for retail, for stores and things, but I think companies will drive into online as well. So, can you pick a product or a category here that just does that thing? I don't think so. I think it's going to be there's going to be this, remember I said at the beginning that there's this gradual return, and people are going to look at this gradual return to work and think through the logic of what they're doing and how they're going to approach the next generation of business. And you're going to see a much more of a focus on things like automation and software-defined data centers. Whether they'll go to the public cloud or not, it's hard to know, because making the shift under the current circumstances of uplifting stuff and moving to the cloud, or redeveloping core apps while you're also going through an internal transformation of distributed working instead of office working, that might be a step too far. I suspect some companies might rush to the cloud, but most companies will tend to pull back. So I think orchestration, automation, working on your infrastructure remotely, working on your systems remotely gets a boost. I think online and digital business gets a boost. So if you're a company today and you've relied on physical sales reps and putting them on a plane or a car and knocking on doors, that's increasingly going to be replaced with a website and a better digital experience on that website. So time spent in web design, serious commitment to making that website really hum. So I don't think there's a specific segment, and all of that's got to be secured, all of that's got to be developed, all of that's got to be maintained. So I think there's this spread, a sprawl of activities actually we're going to see over time.
It's a fascinating answer, and I know we're running a little long here, but I can't, your perspective is so appreciated on a lot of these. Do you think that maybe a new market segment for IT enterprise and networking equipment manufacturers, a lot of the larger manufacturers, they make carrier-grade software and data center software, hardware. They make enterprise and corporate level hardware, and then a lot of them make branch office and SOHO equipment, but a lot of them don't go down really to the sort of residential level. People still rely on their Linksys router or something like that. And I'm wondering if we'll start to see more, with people working from home and corporate folks going home a lot more, if we'll see some of these companies find an opportunity in manufacturing a slightly higher than something you could get at Best Buy, but still at a lower price point than something that you would buy as a branch router for someone who is working at home. Is that a possible market development?
It might be. It's a little bit difficult. We've tried to do that in networking over the years, produce a business router for home use, and it's never really taken off. But then again, remote working, or distributed working as I like to call it, because really, if you want remote working to succeed, everybody has to be equal. The people working away from the office and in the office have to be at peer level, and that's very important. So my belief generally is that the challenge is going to be in the infrastructure. We've got to go from 10 meg broadband to 25 meg to 100 meg broadband, or gigabit. And the infrastructure we're likely to see in the first phase is the build out of these broadband networks, the home networks, where we shift the investment from the cities where the office blocks are to getting the residential networks up to speed, because people are now going to be working from home. How do we secure the people at home is an interesting question, because does it make sense to secure the device, the laptop, the iPad, the smartphone? Does it make sense to secure the house? And in general, we've done that with the branch because we could control that, so we put an appliance in the branch. The idea of replacing the home internet connection with a commercial device provided by your employer, that starts to get into a messy area. Like, does the company see all of your personal internet traffic? Do you want them to? Who pays for the internet connection at that point? Is it the company? If you have an organization that has a high level of employee turnover, maybe you don't want to be provisioning internet connections and then deprovisioning them if you're a company. So I don't immediately see that as an immediate win. It's possible we'll see some sort of appliance that plugs in, but keep in mind, no IT skills at home. It's got to be a device that does something quite unique. Might make more sense to secure the devices than it does to secure the gateway, if you like.
Interesting. So you reach a lot of networking professionals. As we mentioned earlier, they're struggling right now to maintain capacity, to build up extra capacity. There's probably a lot of stress in that business right now. What advice would you have, Greg, for someone in that business right now on not only what they can do now, but also how they can prepare for the next lockdown or the next shutdown, the next wave, if that comes?
Well, it almost certainly will be another wave. So history suggests, if you research the virus, the pandemics, I've been fortunate enough to be a part of pandemic planning for certain critical national infrastructures over the years. And the research is clear. There'll be an initial phase of the virus. There'll be come out of lockdown, and then there'll be a resurgence. So this will go on for months, possibly, certainly into the middle of next year. So you need to be planning for that. The thing you need to be looking for is a secondary problem. So a hurricane, an earthquake, a cyclone, some other global event, a volcano, exploding in the wrong place, would be very damaging to the world at large. So watch out, get your planning right. It's probably too late if you're not planned now. I think the second piece of advice I would give you is watch your security, because remember that as you get the distributed working, as people explode away from the office and move to this distributed, you've got to change your security posture dramatically, and you need to do that fast. People are taking advantage of that gap and moving into that gap. Hackers are looking for those open spaces where you haven't been able to react. If you're an engineer and you're working on the front line, get into some virtual groups. Find yourself forums. Like, for example, here at Packet Pushers, we have a Slack channel, and engineers get in there and talk to each other all day and chat to each other about solutions and ask questions of how would I do this and how can I fix this. Find a way to reach out and build a community, a virtual community around you, so that you can get help, ask people for help, and get tips and advice that you can't get for yourself. Because keep in mind that you might today be relying on a vendor, but they might not be able to help you now in the same way that a colleague can, because they might be able to give you the right perspective in the right place. So build out that network, build out that personal network, and that'll be good for your career just as well as it will be for the work you're doing today.
Fantastic. Well, then let's wrap this up. Last question. If someone is perhaps a networking professional and they're looking for more information, or perhaps they're a network vendor or enterprise IT corporation, and they'd like to build their branding by sponsoring some of the work you do, where can people go to find out more about you, and what's the best way to move forward there?
So the best way is to head on over to packetpushers.net. That's our website. There's 6 podcast channels there to choose from. If you want to hear any of our podcasts, just search for Packet Pushers in your favorite podcatcher. And you can also find us on Twitter as @PacketPushers, and we're punching out the links of every show that we push out every day. Our 2 best channels are the Network Break, where we wrap up the news of the week and do analysis like we've done here today, Ben. And we also do Heavy Networking, which is our deep dive into the guts of the technology, where we're trying to advance a networking engineer's career by exposing the deep insights into the networking technologies. So head on over to packetpushers.net. Loads of stuff there for you to check out.
Fantastic. That's a wonderful perspective. Greg Ferro, packetpushers.net, I really want to thank you for coming on the show today. It's been great, but unfortunately that is all the time that we do have for today. Please remember, this is part of a series of videos we're doing on how enterprise IT is managing with the COVID-19 situation. So please like, subscribe, and check out our playlist to see what other industry pundits and professionals have to say on this issue. And in the meantime, I'm Ben Friedman. This is Live Now, where we are building technology together.